Hi, welcome to another episode of I Can Alteryx That with coaches Alex and John. I'm John. Today, we're going to cover Alteryx Weekly Challenge number 116, a symphony of parsing tools. Let's get started. Alright, so in this challenge, our goal was to take this download link, download some data, and then parse it. So it looks like this. Pretty simple instructions. However, the data that we download comes through as an XML file, which a lot of people don't have a lot of experience dealing with, and they can be a little tricky. And so, to speed things up, I've gone ahead and done the first step here, because it takes my computer about a minute to run it for the first time. But I'll step you through this. So we've been given this download link. So we use the download tool from the developer tool palette, leave all the default fields alone, and then you notice when you do that, this is what an XML file looks like. You have these different levels. These are called nodes inside of these brackets. So we have our root node is the highest level. It's called programs. So everything in this file is underneath the programs root node. And then within that we have the first child node is called program. Within program, we have child nodes called ID, program ID, orchestra. And I'm going to do something. Let's run this again. I'm going to drag a browse on there, and hopefully this won't take more than a few seconds to run. Because there can be child nodes inside of child nodes. You get this nested, like Russian nesting doll effect here. It can be kind of difficult to figure out. Plus, the parsing tool in Alteryx, maybe the wording isn't the most obvious. What options you should use where. This is definitely taking a lot longer than I expected it to. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at the data. If we double click on this, you can see within programs we have program. The next level we have ID, program ID, orchestra, season, and then you see over here we have concert info, which has more nodes nested underneath it. Event type, location, venue, date, and time. And then you can see we actually can have multiple concert infos underneath one program. So we're going to have to deal with that. And I'm not going to go back to the original source and load up all the data, but there's also something called soloists. So you see we have this works ID, works info. And then there we have work ID, which has composer name, title, conductor name. So we can have multiple work IDs within the same program. And let's see if we can find, here we go. And it's also possible to have nested soloists inside of each program. So we have quite a bit of stuff to deal with here. Let's look at the output. So we have program ID, piece ID, ensemble, season. And you can see program ID right here. We have 4 different records of program ID 10681. They all have different piece IDs. They were run at the same time. They have different composers. They're all different work names. And they all have different lists of soloists. So, what I'm going to do, and I'm probably going to use more tools than are really necessary, but I like to keep things as clean as we possibly can. Especially when we're dealing with all these fields. It's good to try to keep things tidy. So in this select tool, I'm going to deselect field 1, that was our original download URL. Now I'm going to deselect download data, download headers. And let's see what we've got. So, program, we can deselect that. ID, we can deselect that. We're going to deselect most of these ID outer XML fields. And I just realized I didn't walk you through this first XML parse tool. So download data is the field with our XML data. So the XML element to parse. We can parse the root element. If you did that here, you would get a field for every single node underneath the root element. So in this case, do not do that because it's going to take forever to run. You get over 1,000 fields. It's just a mess, so don't do that. Auto detect child, again, when you have a lot of child nodes, you don't want that. So in this case, I specifically called out program. And I said return child values and return outer XML. So what that's going to give me, if we go back here, it's going to give me everything that's listed under program. So I'm going to get ID, program ID, orchestra, season, concert info, works info, and then the stuff underneath there. And you can see over here we have 25 fields now. We got program ID outer XML. For a lot of these, we can just go ahead and deselect the outer XMLs because we're not interested in those. The only ones in which you would be interested in the outer XML will be our concert infos, because there's nested information inside of the concert info. And you can see that we have multiple concert infos. And then this thing works info, which has stuff nested inside of it as well. We don't need program outer XML because we already have that information parsed out. And you can see over here we just have more concert infos. So what I'm going to do in the select tool, just to clean things up a bit, let's get rid of ID, outer XML, and ID. We'll get rid of program. Program ID, I'm just going to rename that with the proper capitalization. Deselect that. Orchestra, I believe, is called ensemble here. Season, we'll just rename that with a capital S. And then so concert info, I'm going to keep all of those, but only the outer XMLs. So we're going to deselect concert info, info 2, 3, 4, and 5. Likewise for the works info, I'm going to deselect works info and only keep the outer XML. And I'm going to deselect program outer XML. Alright, so then what I want to do is, because we have 5 concert info outer XMLs, I want all of those to be in the same column. We don't have to do that, but it'll definitely make things easier for us. Let's grab a transpose tool. We're going to group by program ID, and we're only going to select our concert info outer XML fields. So let's go ahead and run this again. So you can see up here in the browse, we only have, we have our fields that we care about, and then all of our outer XMLs that we still have to deal with. Down here in the transpose, you can see now we have multiple records per program ID. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have deselected works info there. I don't want to do with works info at this point. There we go. My mistake. Let's run this again. Okay, so let's look at this again. We have all these null values, so before we dive into this, let's just throw a filter on and filter out where value is null. Or, no, value is not null, pardon me. And let's check this out. So inside of each of these concert info values, we've got event type, location, venue, date, and time. All 5 of those are fields that we need in our output. So what we're going to do here is grab another XML parse tool. And this time what we're going to do is grab the value field. We're going to grab the root element, because I know there's no nested nodes underneath child or concert info. So by looking at the root node and only returning child values, all that's going to do, it's going to give me event type, location, venue, date, and time, and only the values inside of those brackets. So when you run this again, it should just take a second now. You can see down here, we have event type, location, venue, date, and time. More or less, with the date we have to clean up a little bit, exactly how we'd want it in our final output. So let's go ahead and join these two together. So standard join on program ID equals program ID. We can now deselect all of the concert info outer XMLs. We don't need those anymore. I'm going to deselect my right program ID, deselect name, value, and concert info. And I will rename all these properly. That's still location venue. I think this is called performance date. I don't remember what order all those are in, so we'll deal with that later. So now we've dealt with everything in the program, everything concert info. So now we have to worry about our works info. And just real quick, I'm going to go ahead and throw a formula on and clean up this performance date. I'm just going to take the left 10 on performance date there. So not a big deal to clean this one up. Oops. Oh my goodness. Left. Performance date. 10. And you can see there we go, we have our date. So now let's go look, before we run this again, let's check out works info. So this is the next thing that we're going to need to parse. So we've got work ID, and then below a work ID we have composer name, work title, movement, soloists, and within soloists we have soloist, and within soloist we have their name, their instrument, and their role. So what we need to do is let's grab yet another XML parse tool. And now we're going to deal with our works info outer XML. This time we can actually auto detect child. That should work fine for us. And then we want to do child values because some are at that top level, but we also want the outer XML because we have some things that are nested still. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. And this is what really makes this challenge difficult, is really dealing with XML challenging in any case, is understanding when you need your child nodes, when you need your outer XML, when's a good time to do the root, when's a good time to auto detect, or when's a good time to specify a specific layer. It can definitely be challenging. But so you can see now we have ID, composer name outer XML, we don't care about that. Work title outer XML, don't care about this field. Same with movement outer XML, we don't care about that. Soloists outer XML is what we care about. Then we've got interval. I didn't mention it earlier, but in the final output, they actually filter out interval equals intermission. So we'll do that here in just a moment. We've got conductor name, and we don't care about the conductor name outer XML. So let's just go ahead. I like reducing my row count as much as I can, especially on a problem like this where the file size can make things a little slow. So we're going to get rid of where interval does not equal intermission. And I'm going to grab a select tool, and let's just get rid of the things that we don't need anymore. I know I can get rid of work, I can get rid of ID. Composer name, of course, we'll keep that one, and we'll just rename that to composer. Get rid of, whoops, wrong one. Got rid of the composer outer XML. Work title, I believe, is called work. Movement, we'll just capitalize that. Soloists, we only care about the outer XML there. We don't need work outer XML, we don't need interval. And conductor name, we will just keep that and call that conductor. And let's go ahead and run this again, just to see what we have to deal with here. It might seem like we have a long way to go, but we really only have one significant step left at this point. Oh, I should have deselected my works info outer XML as well. We'll do that in a moment. You can see we have all of our nice and neat fields there. And in soloists, we still have to parse that out. Let's go ahead and get rid of our works info outer XML. And let's advance to our final XML parsing. We're going to do this in another stream, just like we did with concert info. So here we're going to parse soloists outer XML. We're going to specify a child name here, and that's going to be the soloist child name. And I'll go back to show you that one again. So you can see over here, within soloists, we have soloist. So by specifying the soloist child name, we're going to get these 3 records for every soloist. And we only want to return child values here. Let's go ahead and run this just so you can see what it looks like. So you can see down here, we now have our soloist's name, the instrument that they play, and then whatever this role character means. And if we go back up to the final output, you can see we have the name followed by their instrument in parentheses. So let's go ahead and grab a formula tool. I'm just going to make a field called soloist text. And I'm going to say soloist name plus opening parenthesis plus, oh, I need a space after that, plus soloist instrument, and then a closing parenthesis. Now, I've already done this, so I know what's going to happen. There are some cases where you don't have soloists or instruments, and in that case, you just get the opening and closing parentheses. And just in the sake of time, I'm going to do one more formula, and I'm going to say if is null not is null because it's if soloist text equals open close parenthesis. And actually, I think we want to trim on that as well. If it equals that, then we're just going to say null. Else, keep it the same. And that'll help speed things up a little bit. And then what we want to do, I guess I'll just run it again. We're going to want to concatenate those into a comma-separated list. Although now I think about it, the names are a last name comma first, and they already have commas in them. So maybe a comma list isn't the best idea. Oops, there it is. So you can see over here we now have our soloist text the way we want it. We'll grab a transform, summarize. And in here, we're going to group by program ID, performance date, time, composer, and work. That way we ensure that all the soloists are being put into the correct performance. We'll take soloist text, go down to string, concatenate, separator. I'm going to do a semicolon with a space. Not going to worry about the text right now. And then we're going to go back up here and join it back in all of those same grouping fields. So we're going to do program ID, performance date, time, composer, and work. And we'll deselect. Let's see, we can deselect soloist, outer XML, all of these right fields, and we will call this soloists. Now the last thing, let's just put everything in the right order. Okay, program ID, piece ID. Okay, I don't think we renamed that one. I think I deselected piece ID over here. Yeah, that should be this. Oops. It's kind of tough to keep everything in the right place. Might as well just do it now. Program ID, piece ID. Ensemble, season, location, venue. Ensemble, season, location, venue. I believe event type came next, then performance date, then time. Okay, then we want conductor, composer, work, movement. Let's go back for here now. Alright, conductor is, where is conductor? So that's going to come right after time. Conductor, composer, work, movement, and then soloist. This should be our final answer once we run this. And one final point is that you'll see the solution output here only has 4,000 some odd records, and ours has about 8,000. Their data ends in like the 2016 season, whereas our data has continued on to the 2020 performance season. So that's why ours has quite a bit more information in it. So don't worry about that. But just bouncing between the two, and our order is different. I'm not going to I believe they sorted on program ID and piece ID, and we're not going to worry about that. But there you can see we have parsed all of this nasty, messy, confusing XML data. Well, there you have it. Hopefully that helped you solving Alteryx Weekly Challenge number 116. As always, thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the Data Coach channel for more awesome lessons on Alteryx and all things data analytics and visualization. Follow Data Coach on Twitter at AskTessellation and follow me personally at jemery_dataviz. Thanks again.